Yeah, these are just some photos of me as a kid with my family, with my grandparents. I I love seeing photos like this because I wasn't the granddaughter they were expecting by any stretch of the imagination, but they became very close with my mother, and I think always especially appreciated all the trips that we took to visit, and that my parents made an effort to keep us connected with the rest of our family.
Late one afternoon in October 2017, Marijuana Rani and Vishwesh Bhatt emerged from an SFA fall symposium session, turned to each other and asked, "How did we get here?" They had just listened to a presentation on Latinx identity and were struck by how much the questions raised mirrored their own. How did two men from two different regions of India come to live and work as chefs in the South? Why had the region attracted so many other Indian expats and chefs? What was their role in the modern South? And how did the South become their home? Whether you fit in the place where you live is integral to identity, and it feels especially fraught when you're a newcomer in a region that often celebrates tradition and family legacy. I know this feeling well. Growing up in Kentucky, a first-generation American with an Indian father and an Irish mother, I didn't know where I belonged. I was brown enough to field questions about where I was really from, but with my clumsily draped half-sari and inability to perform traditional dances, I didn't fit in with the other kids at the Bluegrass Indo-American Civic Society events either. Kentucky was home, but those caveats kept me an outsider, even after I grew up, moved to Chicago, and became a writer, editor, and cookbook author. Some people assumed I was an expert on all Indian food. They could not grasp the vastness and diversity of the cuisines cooked across the subcontinent. But they expected me, with my foreign-sounding name and brown skin, to know all of it. They asked if I learned to cook in my grandmother's kitchen, and which makes me laugh because if only they knew that my blue-eyed, red-haired Irish mother cooked most of the dosa and aloo gobi I ate while I was growing up. Like many other third culture kids, I longed for belonging, and I found it, or something that felt like a path towards it at least, in cooking and writing. I could work out that confusion I felt on a blank page or a cutting board. Food was also a refuge for Irani and Bhatt. Both were living in the South, pursuing other careers when they began to work in restaurants. After moving from California to Asheville in 2005, Irani quit his real estate career in 2009. Lacking restaurant experience but seeking a business opportunity that resonated with him, he opened Chai Pani that same year. The restaurant is centered around chaat, the Indian snacks eaten in homes, on the street, and in my personal history at train stations throughout the country. Irani says that chaat belongs to everybody. There are no rules. It transcends religion and regionality, he says. Bhatt learned to cook as an undergrad at the University of Kentucky, desperate for something better than dining hall spaghetti and inspired by memories of his mother's cooking and the packets of garam masala, turmeric, and mustard seeds she sent him. As a graduate student at the University of Mississippi in the early 1990s, he realized that he enjoyed cooking for friends more than his political science classes. That understanding led him to go into food and eventually become the executive chef at Snack Bar in Oxford. Food intertwined their search for identity. Seeing the okra and beans they grew up eating in India growing in southern garden plots made them feel at home in this new world. Irani and Bhatt kept their conversation going after that symposium. In the years since moving to the area, they agreed, they had become Southerners. If you refer to Bhatt as an Indian American, he will gently but definitively correct you. He is an American who came from India, ma'am. The edge in his voice and word choice exemplifying the polite tone heard when someone from either locale feels the need to correct you. Meanwhile, Irani, who was born in London and lived in Maharashtra, India, and in San Francisco before settling in Asheville, says that he's lived in the South longer than anywhere else and thinks of himself as both from India and from America. It's easy to hang on to the idea of being from somewhere else, he reminds us, but this is my home. With that cultural mapping in mind, they asked each other how they could build on their experiences as Southerners to help make their home a better place for natives and immigrants, not to mention the next generation. We integrate our food the way we do our family and our lives, Irani says. They asked a few friends to help them cook through the conversation for a dinner series they call Brown in the South. On the roster was Atlanta chef Asha Gomez, a native of Kerala who had recently published her cookbook, My Two Souths, about melding Indian and Southern ingredients and flavors. Also Chidi Kumar, who grew up in Chandigarh and is the chef and co-owner of Garland in Raleigh. From Nashville, the effervescent Manit Chawan of Chawan Ale and Masala House also joined in. The chefs crafted menus around ingredients like cornmeal, peanuts, and rice that are claimed by both cultures. At the first dinner in January 2018 at the Chai Pani in Decatur, Georgia, they themed it Desi Diner. Guests enjoyed Irani's take on shrimp and grits made with upma, shrimp, and tomato patia, Kumar's speckled trout fritters with chutney and piccalilli tartar sauce, Bhatt's pork meatloaf with apple achar, Gomez's famous Kerala fried chicken, and Chawan's garam masala spiced hot chocolate topped with a rose-scented marshmallow. I was there that night, part of the giddiness that filled the room as we marveled at the trick they pulled off. The aromas of toasted cumin seeds and Kashmiri chili powder floated from the kitchen, as did the sounds of Bollywood music. That night, the restaurant felt mystical, a Shangri-La where bhangra and banjos lived side by side, and everyone was welcome. The chefs continued to explore that kinship between Indian and Southern cuisines and invited others to cook along with them. Later that same year, at the Indian Summer Dinner hosted in Nashville by Chawan, the Atlanta chef Farhan Momin toasted curry leaves, mustard seeds, and coconut in ghee and poured the mixture over cornbread, which he served tableside in cast iron pans. The following year, at a dinner during Asheville's Chow Chow Festival, Samantha Four of Lexington, Kentucky served tomato pies vivid with turmeric and tangy with tamarind-cooked onions, uniting her Kentucky and North Carolina upbringing with her Sri Lankan heritage. In tableside chatter and in panel discussions staged at two of the events, the chefs drew connections between the sweet and slightly bitter flavors of Carolina barbecue and Goan pork vindaloo, recalled their mothers using jaggery, the way Southerners pour cane syrup on a biscuit, noted that the rice and tea grown in India had traveled the earth to find a new home in the South. They spoke of how the culture of hospitality in India and the South makes it impossible to get out of any visit without just a small bite of something that often turns into a feast, and how that welcome further made them home in the South. I would leave Brown in the South events with a big smile on my face, thinking about food that spanned the chasm between my Kentucky hometown and my grandmother's kitchen in Andhra Pradesh. Those nights proved how far we'd come from my parents' attempts to jerry-rig a chaat out of roasted peanuts, Rice Krispies, and chili powder when we first moved to the U.S. We finally belonged. I wasn't the only person aglow with ghee and goodwill. Brown in the South became a media darling, celebrated in the pages of major food magazines, proof that Indian food had shaken off its curry buffet past. But truly fitting in isn't as easy as that. If you're fully welcome at the table, your whole self is welcome, not just the part of you that smiles and feeds others. Irani and Bhatt wanted to do more than serve food. They wanted to make change. As well they should. Chefs and restaurants are so much more than sources of food. They're leaders in political and social movements. They feed social justice protesters and donate their food and time to charities over and over again. Why not learn from them? For Brown in the South to become as meaningful as Bhatt and Irani originally imagined it to be, chefs and guests needed to push past what felt good to address deeper and more relevant issues, especially if those discussions were uncomfortable. As they weaved cardamom into Southern culinary traditions, they had to address this time in history. In a moment when people of good conscience march in the street to proclaim that Black Lives Matter, tear down Confederate statues, and pull back the curtain at restaurants to excoriate chefs who treat their employees poorly, then Brown in the South suggests we all have a responsibility to do more than just bask in a lovely meal. But how do you transform a dinner series into a catalyst for action? Priya Parker, the author of The Art of Gathering, says we create meaning and consequence in gatherings by marking what is important and identifying what we need from them. At Brown in the South, the chefs already do the work of creating context in their food. So how do we go deeper and explore the difficult truths behind those cultures and their commonalities? How do we use the power of a shared experience for a change of behavior and heart? Parker says that we need to do more than gather at a table and share a meal, and she's right. As a kid, I sat in school cafeteria tables stacked with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with people who didn't look like me, and that was fine, but on the days that my lunchbox stank of cumin and asafoetida, it made me feel embarrassed and misunderstood. Things have changed, and today those same people might ask me about the dishes on my plate and even want to try them, but I don't want my lunch to be an exhibit at the zoo or othered by the mainstream. The need Parker asks us to identify is to address racism and anti-immigrant sentiments in America that threaten to tear the country apart. Southerners have a jump on people in the rest of the country who've often been able to avoid taking ownership for their role in systemic racism. Owing to recent immigration patterns, the face of the New South is brown. The South has been a magnet for much of the Indian population in America, which grew by almost 40% between 2010 and 2017, according to Southern Asian Americans Leading Together. Irani describes the South as one of the most diverse, progressive parts of the country. But we must ask, are the Vietnamese refugees who work fishing boats along the Gulf Coast and the Kurdish who work bakeries and cafes in Nashville afforded the same welcome given to Irani and the rest of us? As well as the highly educated, well-paid Indian executives in the tech and telecom industries in Atlanta and Dallas? Or does the classism in America more closely resemble the caste system in India than we'd like to think? Those are questions this group is uniquely poised to tackle as Americans grapple with their roles in social justice and injustice, and as the vice presidential candidacy of Kamala Harris prompts a fresh look at the relationship between Blacks and Indian and born Americans. A conversation between these groups about the racial attitudes they face adds nuance to the larger conversation and exposes the complexity of race relations in America and in India. It disabuses people of the assumption that people of color cannot be racist, and pointing out the hierarchy of skin color within shades of brown. Can the brown people of the South become allies with Black people? There's plenty to connect us, but it's facile to talk about the curry powder that seasons a chicken salad at a church picnic without acknowledging that it made its way there through slave trade and spice trade intertwined for centuries. We can do more than debate the cultural appropriation of turmeric, chai, and chana masala. We can talk about what happens to authenticity when people with a strong food culture make their homes elsewhere. In India and the South, places steeped in tradition, change is familiar. And both places suffer when people insist their cultures must remain suspended in memory behind glass. Brown in the South will become more meaningful as the chefs further plumb the nature of identity and address how it shifts when immigration renders you an outsider. That 2017 SFA Symposium got Irani and Bhatt thinking about racism and belonging. They took action to align that conversation with their community with those dinners, and expanded the events in the second year to host discussions that challenge participants to take action. This is what it's like if everybody stands up and is counted and not kept separate, Irani says. My daughter asks me what Southern means, and I tell her it means her. She needs to contribute to the South, growing and evolving. We all need to be part of it. Thank you. I remember driving through parts of the South. We'd do these family road trips, and I remember one night there was something going on, and all of these little motels and everything were booked up, and we kept having to drive, and then finally we were just driving past some of them, and I asked my dad, why aren't we stopping? And he just looked at me and he said, because there's some people around here who don't want to see me and your mom together. And I wish that we had talked about it more when I was growing up. My father passed when I was 15, and so it's one of those things on a long list of things I would love to be able to talk to him about. But for us, it's just kind of part of who we are. And that's what I love about what the chefs who started and are keeping Brown in the South going, what I love about what they're doing is they're looking at how do we take those experiences and turn them into something, you know, as a point of conversation, and how do we find some commonality and use all of those experiences to make it better for kids or nieces and nephews or friends' children or just anyone in this next generation. I mean, I do think about that. I have my younger brother and his family live in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, and his kids look just like us, and his daughter looks just like me. And she's 5 and she's very self-assured and all of that, but I want her to feel like fully like an American and not like someone who comes from some other place.